Did you see what got published by what they passed in Congress 2 days ago?
I haven't heard about it.
Well, it's really important. I wrote a book I used to have there, somebody has there, called The Holy Grail of Investing. Ray Dalio is one of the greatest investors in history, obviously. Good friend of mine. And I interviewed him years ago. I went in for a 30-minute interview, and he said, Tony walked out with a 4-hour because I just dug into his brain. But at the end, one of the last questions I asked him is, what's the single most important investment principle you could teach another human being? He said, Tony, well, you have to understand all investing is risk reward. And he said, so the more you can reduce your risk but have upside reward, the better it is. But there's only one way to do that consistently without luck. And he said, I call it the holy grail of investing. He said, funny you should say that. I worked on it for 30 years to refine this principle for myself. And he said, if you have 8 to 12 uncorrelated investments, hard to get uncorrelated today, right? Because many things are aligned across markets today. But you can do it when you have private equity investments, private credit investments, and so forth. He said, if you can find 8 to 12 that are strong investments, you reduce your risk 80% and you gently increase your upside. There's no loss in your upside. So I decided to write a book on that one principle, but also on private equity. Because right now, it pissed me off. I hear kids will say to me, well, only the wealthy get more wealthy. It's just total bullshit. I know it looks that way, but it's bullshit. But it's not their fault. That's what they get educated. So I thought, let me write this book because I knew this was going to happen in Congress. Congress has been talking about it. They passed it 2 days ago. Up until now, let's say you put money in the S&P 500. That's where most people will put their money today. So over the last 36 years, it's had about a 9.5% return, right, over time. If you had $1 million you put aside and you wake up 36 years later, it's $26 million. Private equity has compounded. Basic private equity, not the people I interviewed in this book. Basic private equity, like not the great ones, 15.5. So almost 50% faster per year. What does that mean? Same $1 million, instead of being worth $26 million, it's worth $142 million. Same investments. Only one problem, access. So you'd say to me, Tony, that sounds wonderful. Maybe you can get it because you know some few people. I could, but I couldn't get a large volume either, because getting a volume of these investments is difficult. It's like the velvet rope, right? It's pre-sold. Everybody's in the game. So I started doing my homework, and I found out something was much better. I found out you can actually buy a piece of the companies, not the fund, and you get the 2 and 20 they normally charge everybody else. And so I own right now a piece of over 85 different private equity firms, from Vista, $100 billion company, Robert Smith, who's produced a 26% compounded return for over 25 years, right? I can give you list after list after list. But here's what's interesting. You used to have a minimum, net worth you have to have, or a minimum income. They just changed the rules. I've written a book about this, and they did it yesterday. Senate has to pass it now, but they're going to. It looks like there's no challenge. All you have to do is take a test, because the idea was you shouldn't have these sophisticated investments.
Yeah. Did you know about that?
I knew they were trying to pass a test that someone could take, and my understanding was that the test was pretty passable. I mean, basic questions.
It's very basic. Because here's the problem. Think about this.
It's the same questions you take to trade options on Robinhood, basically.
I mean, is that a good or a bad thing, would you say?
Well, I'll tell you what it is.
Yeah.
If you look at the history, in the last 36 years, every stock market in the world has underproduced private equity. And when stock markets crash, these guys don't have to sell.
But do you think that's going to open up for bad actors to say, hey, listen, these people are going to invest in private equity, and I could do the bare minimum, and they could invest in my fund, and they don't have to be as sophisticated?
Well, you still have the SEC measuring everything, right? You still have to pass.
But as long as you're upfront with your disclosures, it doesn't matter if it's a bad investment, because then you leave it up to the people to pick.
You can do a bad investment on S&P 500.
That's true. You go to a casino when you're 21 in Vegas.
That's true.
But if I'm looking to get things on my side where there's less volatility, less losses, faster returns, and a larger return for 36 years, it can't be your whole portfolio.
My worry is that then it comes down to more so good marketing to market that fund than it does the actual competency of the business. That's my worry.
Well, there's always something to worry about if you want to worry. I'd prefer to focus on what people can take advantage of if they really want to grow at the same rate of anybody else who's very wealthy. Because the wealthy have had that exclusively for them. You couldn't get in it before. But that's
Yeah.
changing. And I think that's one of the good things that Congress is doing.
And how would that be different from investing in an individual stock versus like an index? Because we always preach just invest in the index. Don't pick
Yes, you
individual
want to.
stocks.
Well, you do this. Think about this. I own these companies that own 100 or 200 companies each, but here's the difference. They buy the company as cheap as they can, and they're very smart. That's how they do it. Then what do? They put a new CEO, they bring in AI, they make new changes in technology, and they build the company up and either take it public or they sell it to another larger company. And so it's a more efficient way of doing business. The number of stocks has shrunk over the last 30 years, right? They haven't gotten larger. The number of private businesses that have private financing has gone through the roof. Private credit. I remember not that many years ago when, people were trying to get junk bonds, they're getting 4% of their junk bonds, and I was getting 11% on private equity, and I had less than 0.5% problem, meaning, money dropping out. Any bank would die for that because these guys loan money to companies that they've already invested in. They know everything about them. They know who runs it. They know where they're going. These are the masters of finance. I'm not trying to sell a book because I give away all the money for my book to Feeding America. But so if anybody wants to pick it up, read The Holy Grail of Investing and it will blow your mind. Because it'll show you private credit. It'll show you sports teams. Like, I originally when I was growing up, like I was in right field at Dodger Stadium once a year to buy a ticket to be in the bleachers. And now I'm an owner of them, right? So there's ways with sports teams to own a piece of it. You don't have to own the whole company. They give you tremendous benefits and are a blast, and they're an uncorrelated investment. Right? They have tied to what the S&P 500 is doing. So there are just so many opportunities to get a broader base. But again, you're either going to have to build businesses and sell them for a multiple, or you're going to have to become a good investor. That's how you develop wealth in this country. It hasn't changed an ounce, but the access has changed. There's more access as we're speaking right now than there's ever been.
What's been your best financial investment?
Single best financial investment? I think probably I bought a power plant in West Virginia. Because I saw what was happening with AI coming and the need for data centers. And it was a coal power plant that they were shutting down, and I saved all the jobs, and that investment's returns ridiculous.
How did you find that?
Because I'm always studying the trends, right? Again, you're not going to do anything unless you become a student. You got to become a student of personal development, because if you don't grow, it's like, I remember you asked me the question, my best investment.
Yeah.
I asked that to Warren Buffett, and Warren said, Tony, it's what you do. I said, what are you talking about? He said he invested in, what was the guy's course, the public speaking course, Dale Carnegie. Because I invested in Dale Carnegie. He said, most important investment I've ever made in my life. He said, because otherwise my ideas would have dropped out, but I learned how to communicate my ideas. Otherwise you wouldn't know who I am. He goes, and he said, the most important investment you can ever make is in yourself. He actually did a big tirade on this 2 years ago. It was on one of his talks. And he said, look, here's the best part about this investment. No one can tax it, right? Your skills keep growing and no one can take any piece of that. If dollar goes crazy, it goes to nothing, and we got shekels, you'll get the most shekels if you're the most skilled lawyer, the most skilled investor, the most skilled whatever the case may be. He said, the investment in yourself is always the first and most important investment. I believe that's true. Been true for me.
And what's been your worst investment?
Probably when I was like 17, 18, 19, I was probably 19, I think 18 or 19, and I went by this dry cleaners. I lived in Marina Del Rey, and this woman pulled up in a brand new Rolls-Royce Corniche convertible. She was a knockout lady anyway. I was dumb enough to think I had a moment with this lady, right? So I talked to her a little bit, and I said, wow, what's your business? And she goes, well, my husband's business. I was like, okay. He's in penny stocks and everything else. I said, really? I said, well, dumbest thing you can ever ask. Got any tips? She goes, actually, we do. And when we just think it's hot, and I got another one's about to shoot. And so you want to share any tips? She gave me the tips, and I took $10,000, which at that time was a huge amount of money for me. I poured it all in this stupid, speculation. I wasn't investing. And sure enough, it went up for about 2 months, and then it went through the floor, and I lost all of it. And that's what told me, you don't speculate. You learn to become an intelligent investor.
Why didn't you sell?
Well, the amount it gone up was not enough to change my life by itself. I think it went up by $14,000, and was like, okay, $4,000, that's nice. And plus, everybody's saying this thing's going to keep going, right? They kept talking about, they're talking about this going to change exchanges and all this bullshit. You can't get caught up in trying to get rich quick. It just doesn't work. Never worked.
Yeah. So what trends are you seeing over the next few years? If it's going from AI data centers, where do you think is the next step beyond that?
Well, I think what very few people are talking about right now is nanotechnology. I mean, at least the next 10 years, AI is going to empower a lot of other things. But right now, there's technology where they can literally create these nanobots. They're too expensive right now. They're like $1 million to do, or $10 million, whatever the number really is. I don't remember. Ray Kurzweil was telling me this. He's one of the greatest inventors of all time. And he said they can put they'll be able to put 10% of your red blood cells with these nanobots, and you'll be able to run a 4-minute mile. You'll be able to hold your breath for 5 hours. If you had a heart attack, you'd have 2 days to get it to the hospital without, dying. There are things going to happen with nanotechnology that are beyond imagination. And so it's really early. If you're doing there, it's going to take a while. And, pioneers often get the arrows in their back. But I'm on the verge. I've watched where those things are. I've dipped my toes in those places. And I think robotics is the other obvious one, right? Robotics is going to be huge.